Hi everybody, thanks for coming today. So let's get into Photoshop because there are so many things to talk about here. All right. I had several questions outside about what level this is going to be for and things like that. And one of the things that I find interesting about Photoshop is that you can do lots of things without really knowing the whole application. Photoshop is huge, absolutely huge. There are so many things that it can do. But I know lots of people who work in Photoshop every day who only know 15% of the program. You know, they need to get in their job, get the red eye out in a couple seconds. They need to alter the color a little bit. They need to crop the photo. Bam, 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 they're out. And that's all that they do. And then there are other people who, you know, like the Deacon Clones up on lynda.com who are doing these amazing things, special effects in Photoshop. So whatever you want to do, you can start out, you can do tasks, get some immediate results. You don't have to know the whole program. All right? So let's talk about a couple things that are new and a couple things that have been around. I want to first show you a new feature called camera shake reduction. And the reason I think this is a real important one is because of all of us taking pictures with our iPhones and our Droid devices. And what ends up happening often is we're not using that little tripod or the new little things. In fact, we're even adding these amazing lenses to these iPhones. Have you guys seen these lenses? You can do macro shots. They're absolutely unbelievable. So this is what happens. Now, this particular feature is not going to help you when one person is moving too fast in the picture. This is the entire image has a blur that's going probably in the same direction because you moved the camera. So I'm just going to go to my filters, and I want to go down to sharpen, and then I want to choose shake reduction. You can see we have several other filters, but this is the one that I'm talking about. Now immediately Photoshop goes in and puts a box around something that it thinks is going to be where it can calculate what that shake blur is. And if I decide that that's not what it is, and by the way, you may not see that box if you don't have the advanced pulled down. Just by default, that's not going to be down. You know, I can draw another box over another area that I think would be a better place for it to calculate. It's going to add that box. If you have too many, you might start confusing the issue and you might get a result that's different from what you want. You can also play around with some of these options here, these sliders, but without my doing anything else but just turning this filter on and clicking OK, that's the result I get. So that's a pretty big difference from what was wrong with that image immediately upon opening it. All right, content aware is always, I should probably say this for last because this is the one that everybody really likes, and that's because you can get such a dramatic effect without really spending too much time with that. So I've got lots of images here, but this is one that really displays a lot of what I'm trying to convey. We are often taking pictures, finding pictures, hopefully legally finding pictures, that we want to use for a website or a project. And in this case, a picture was taken, but it would be really nice if this could be wider to be a web banner. But there's not the money or the time to go back, find these people again, set them up in the same place, right? We're all in that kind of a situation. But there are several things wrong. Number one, it's not wide enough. Number two, these guys are just kind of messing up my whole mood here. So what can I do to transform this photo into something that would be the photo I want, not the photo that I got? I'm going to just select this just to show you what happens when we do a basic transform. So go to free transform. I'll just do that, and that lets me do lots of different transformation things at the same time. And as I stretch, let's watch our surfers. Okay, that's not going to work. These guys don't look like surfers. They look like munchkins. Okay, so I'm going to back that off, and I'm going to use another command that we have, which is this new content aware scale, and it's pretty powerful. In fact, it's incredibly powerful, but it can't figure everything out. So as I drag, watch our surfers again, but also keep an eye on their surfboards, okay? So I'm dragging out. The surfers are looking great, right? But this, yeah, really long boards, yeah, exactly. So that's not going to work either. But it did a really great job. Look at how realistic the waves look, the rocks look, the beach looks, right? And then the surfers are just perfect. So I'm going to have to do something else to try to make this work. And what I'm going to do is just help Photoshop give it some clues as to what I want it to protect and what it's allowed to stretch. So since I was pretty happy with everything else, what I'm going to do is just grab my quick selection tool and just very quickly, I'm going to go over and highlight these surfers. I'm going to hold down my shift key to make sure that I'm getting each one is being added to the selection. And it doesn't have to be a perfect selection, though it seems like today I'm not grabbing things as easily as or quickly as I typically do. All right. And now I'm going to save this selection. So I'm going to go to the select menu, choose save selection, and then I'm just going to go ahead and name this. So I'm going to call this surfers. All right, deselect. Let's do this again. Whoop, change tools. And this time, when I choose content aware scale, same command. But before I start dragging, I'm going to go up to the top, and you can see I have this little, in fact you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it, and it says protect. So from this drop-down menu, my selection is there, called surfers. And now as I drag, those surfboards and those surfers are looking pretty darn good. And within, I mean, if I wasn't explaining this to you, this would have been done in what, 60 seconds, 90 seconds? Right? Wow. And I've got a completely different look. Now let's take care of this situation over here. If I wanted this to just be the feel of surfers looking out to those waves, right? This is not doing it. So I want to replace, no offense to this guy, but I want to replace him and his child, and let's use the lasso tool instead, with hopefully a background that's going to look realistic. So after selecting him, I'm going to go to the edit menu, choose fill, but instead of any of the other fill options that I have, I'm going to choose content aware, which tells Photoshop to figure out what should be in that spot. Click OK, and it's done. I'm going to get rid of a couple of these little surfers out here. And maybe one more. I've just got too many and they're looking like they're all drowning out there or something. So there we go. Within just a couple of minutes, I've transformed that. And I know this is a really popular one for just about everybody who has a photo they'd like something taken out of.
You went to, I'm sorry, edit and then
fill. Okay. And mine is defaulting to content aware, but if you have never used that command before, it's probably going to say something like foreground or background. So just make sure that you make that modification. Otherwise, you'll find that your selection is filled with like white or black, and just undo. Remember, Control Z on the PC and Command Z on the Mac is undo.
a specific shape rather.
No, but let me go back here just for a second, because you bring up a really good point. Let's see how far back I have to go. Oh. You know what? I'm just gonna revert this here. Okay. When you are doing a content-aware selection, you're going to find that each time you select, you might get just slight variances on the results, and you'll get a feel for what Photoshop's looking for. But what I try to do is I don't want to get too tight of a selection, and that's one of the reasons that when I do a content-aware fill, I don't use the quick selection tool, because what's awesome about this tool is look at how quickly I can get a really accurate selection of this, right? But I may not want that. In fact, let's just try this. Let's just try this really quick. Let's do edit, fill, content aware. Yeah. So I need to be careful about that, because it may be too tight. Either one, I didn't include enough, or it may not have enough information around it to make an accurate fill. So I typically just use the lasso tool to do a loose selection, and I tend to get better results with that. But for accurate selections, that is the perfect tool to use. Yeah. And the other thing too is if you get, like I'm zoomed in here and I can see that some of the waves are a little bit blurrier here, you can do multiple selections and multiple content aware fills to try to get a better result. Okay, any other questions on that? All right. Let's see. I want to go over a couple of new blurs. Photoshop has had several options for blurring parts of images, but these two are brand new. It's called the spin blur and the line blur, or path blur, not line blur. So I know when Courtney was showing the site and Mike and her went to Adobe Learn, this is one of the assets from the Adobe Learn, so it's free. You can download it, play with it. And this is specifically created so that you can practice each of the different blurs in the blur gallery. But I'm just going to focus here on the clock and on this path one. So let me zoom in just a little bit. Too much, Donna? And what I want to do is have the arms of this clock spinning, and I want it to just convey a sense of movement. Now, spin blurs and path blurs are for giving that feeling of movement when either, number one, the camera did not capture it, or two, it's not capturable, but you still want to give that image. There's one on lynda.com that I love where he has a sprinter going off the block, and you can tell that the person has left and really moving fast, but because it was such a fast camera, everything is perfectly clear, right? And it would be really nice to just give that sense of movement. So they use the path blur on the back of his arm as he's coming forward, on one of his feet coming up off the ground. It was very cool. And it just gave you that sense of, wow, he's really moving fast. So that's what these blurs are for. The first thing I'm going to do, well, actually, I think we're okay. I was going to say I could probably make this a smart object. That's one of the, I should mention this because this is a really great way. If your filter will allow it to do its thing on a smart object, it's really nice to do that because that allows you the flexibility of going back and it's completely non-destructive. Filters are destructive, meaning they actually change the pixels. So if you can make it a smart object, which I can do here just by clicking on the layer, right-clicking and converting it to a smart object, it means that it's being protected. And it's also going to create a layer that allows me to go back in, double click on that blur, and change my mind the next day with the specifications for that blur. All right, with that layer targeted, I need to tell Photoshop which layer I want to work on. I'm going to go to the filter, down to blur gallery, and I'm going to choose the spin blur. Immediately I see I get this circle, and wherever I drag that, can you see it's blurring everything behind it? I'm going to place it over the clock. You can see that it doesn't match because not everything we want to blur that's circular is actually a circle because we don't take pictures of things right on, right? We're at an angle. So the little dots on the outside allow me to bring this in, rotate it, and I really want it right here on top of the clock. I don't want it capturing the sky or any of those bars underneath it. I'm going to move the big dots in for just a moment, but I'll show you what those are for. So we've got these little dots around the outside, and then we have the big dots on the inside. The difference between these, or the distance between these two, is where that blur then goes out to clear again. So if I want that blur to extend all the way, then I need to drag them out over those little dots. But it's the little dots that let me alter the shape of this. So sometimes I move the big dots in so I can really get an accurate. And if I need to move it, I can drag the center. All right, I'm going to bring these big dots out. Wow, today is not my spin blur day. It's just every time I do this, I'm getting it the wrong place. Okay, so I look at this and I think, okay, that's all right. But what would have been really nice is if I could keep the numbers clearer and just have the hands, because really the numbers aren't moving around the clock, right? Doesn't make sense. So by making this a smart object and using this as a smart filter, I have a mask. And we all know, if you've ever worked with masks, that if there's a mask, I can get rid of part of it by painting in black. The white is the mask, which means it's applying through everything. And if I get a paintbrush over here that is black, and let me just take a look at a brush here. And I can grab one that has more feathering, that's not as opaque. I can get a solid one. And then I put my cursor over here and think, okay, that's too small, so I can press my right bracket to make it larger or smaller. And I'm just going to make sure that I've targeted that mask, and then I'm going to just start painting. And as I paint, I'm clearing up the background. Now I could have used, as I said, a more opaque brush, and I'll just grab in here, and I have more of what I had visualized. And that's what this is about. That's what Photoshop's about. That's what all these applications are about. I visualize something, but the reality is just not there. And that's what I get to do in these applications, is make that happen. All right, let's just move quickly down to the bottom, and let's apply the path blur. So I'm going to click here, quickly convert it to a smart object. Make sure that that is the layer that is targeted. Go to my filter, and I want to do blur gallery, path blur, and this is a little bit different. I'm going to click on one side, then to the other. Oops, finish that. I'm going to drag this back across. And then I'm going to bend this one by grabbing that point. You can see I can change the shape of that. Right after we were done with this in our previous session, one of the attendees had a picture of a girl, and she had just whipped her head around. So her body was still, but the hair was going around, and it had captured it very clearly, and she really wanted that sense of movement. So we added several of these to get different parts of her hair to blur in different directions, and that's what this allows you to do, is grab this handle and then change the direction of that blur. Another thing that I find is really helpful up here in path blur, it says basic versus rear sync flash. There's a real difference between those two. So let me just make a couple of these. And for time's sake, I'm just going to accept this real quickly. And again, if we go and look at our mask, it may be that I want to paint this, just some of the fingers, because if you've ever watched a potter, right, their hands often stay still as the pot is going around. And I can change my mind too. If I find that this is, I've made it too clear, just go back with a white paintbrush and do it again. All of this stuff is editable. You can go back and change your mind as often as you want. Okay, I want to talk about Camera Raw as a filter. Anybody here who has shot film out of like a Canon or a Nikon, a larger SLR camera, knows that you have another option for shooting pictures instead of JPEG, which is what we all get from our small cameras typically. It's called Camera Raw, and it's equivalent to having really the negative, so that you can go back and change the processing of that photo, you can change its exposure, all of that, which is captured in a JPEG and hard printed in there. It's a little bit harder to get those changes made. So what Adobe did is they knew how popular this was. It's a separate program, but they have turned Camera Raw into a filter. It still is its separate program if you want to work on that, but you can also now work right inside of Photoshop instead of having to leave Photoshop and come back. So let me just make this a smart object, and then I'm going to go to my filters, choose Camera Raw, and you'll see that it shows up in a window that is exactly what the Camera Raw application looks like. One of the things I really like about Camera Raw, and by the way, you can edit JPEGs in Camera Raw. You don't have as much flexibility, but there's really easy things to do to correct your images very quickly. And if you go up to lynda.com, you're going to see lots of videos about people using Camera Raw instead of Photoshop, and then for special effects moving it into Photoshop. So I'm just going to take a couple seconds to warm this picture up. If you know that if you take pictures at night, often we get a color cast on them. I might increase the saturation just a little bit here, and maybe the vibrance a little bit, just very quickly. Click OK. that's a huge difference for just a couple of seconds. And it's in a language that I can understand often easier than in Photoshop. They use different types of terms. Okay. I want to also bring up this new feature only because I know that people are now taking composites from one photo, cutting out the background and putting it on top of another photo. In fact, in the mobile apps, you can do that in one of the iPad free mobile apps. So you could take, like I just took my dog out of this and I put her into an architectural drawing, but the perspective was wrong. I was trying to get all 4 feet on the ground, but because of the way the picture was shot, her front feet were like off, or the feet were below the floor. So we have this feature called perspective warp, and it's very easy to use, and it gives you that opportunity to change the perspective. Now, at first glance, this looks like that train was sitting on those tracks, but in fact, if we get rid of the finished product and go and look at the start, it was composited from 2 different images. And though the train is on top of the tracks, we don't have that technology yet to be flying above the tracks, right? So I need to get this train down and on those tracks and in order for it to look realistic. So I'm going to target that layer, the train 1, train 2 sitting down here below, and it's got its own problems that we don't have to deal with right now. And I'm going to go to the edit menu, just choose perspective warp. My goal here is to match the perspective of the train and then warp that perspective to the background. So I'm going to drag a box and I'm going to try to match something. And this is hard, right? This train has a lot of different lines going on. I've got to find something that I can follow from the back of the train as close as I can to the front of the train. So what I'm going to use here is this side panel of the engine, because it goes long enough that I think if I can match that, I might be able to match that perspective. Just anything that you find that you can follow and lay one of those guides on, so that's close enough. Now I need the perspective of the front of the train, because I need that cattle pusher to work. And as I approach the other one, notice it turns purple. It's understanding that it needs to connect to that 3D perspective. I let go, they snap, which is always a big help. And what I'm going to use for this one is try to imagine where that railroad tie goes. So I'm going to use that there, pop this one over. All right. Now I'm ready to warp the train's perspective to the background's perspective. And we have a nice little button here that tells us I want to warp this. Click it, and before I start dragging, one thing I do know is that I want that train to be standing up straight. Now there may be a time where I want a special effect where the train's going so fast that the wheels are coming off, right? We've all seen the movies. It doesn't quite tip over, but it comes off the tracks. And that's not this. This I really want all the wheels to be on that track. So I'm going to shift click any line that I wanted to keep that perspective either flat or vertical. You're going to see that the train's going to adjust just slightly when I do that. Let go of that shift key and now just start dragging these points. So I'm going to drag the caboose down, and he's gotten way too big. So I'm going to squish him down a little bit. And I want the front wheels, you can see, are falling off kind of. I need to push them back a little. Following the wheels, maybe the caboose could come out and down a little bit more. Believe me, you can, as much as this doesn't take very much time, you know, you get closer and closer and go, oh, I could get that a little closer. And then, you know, 3 hours go by and there you are. And I just want to adjust that cattle pusher down just a hair. Okay. When I'm satisfied with it, then I just go ahead and click the check mark to accept those changes. And there's my train sitting on the tracks. So you may not have to match something that is, you know, Hollywood's using for their latest movie, but there are lots of things that I see everybody who has a camera walking around because they've got their phone and they want to do really neat things with it. So think about that. You want to take out the background. Now, getting rid of the background is a whole nother thing. You notice this train had no background, right? So if I got rid of the background, the train's sitting there by itself. So that's what all of these selection tools are for. We have a lot of them because we know that that's what people want to do. They want to cut something out of the background and get rid of that background and bring it in onto something else or manipulate it some way, which we're going to do right now really quickly. I'm going to show you Puppet Warp. And I'm using an example of something you'll probably never use, and I'm looking for a better example. and I was online this morning looking at some things. Puppet Warp, I'm sure you guys have seen the news about how models, anybody who is photographed, no one ever ends up in a magazine looking the way they really do. Their necks are lengthened, their legs are lengthened. We have torsos that are completely impossible, that kind of thing. And that's what we can owe to Photoshop. Because Puppet Warp is one of the things that lets you extend legs. It also, I was just telling Mike this morning, I saw an example of an eagle flying. And what the photographer did is they duplicated the layer, they puppet warped the wings so that here was the eagle like this, right? So then he did one where he warped the wings like this, and then he made it like 30%, and it was so cool because just that extra image gave you that sense of that eagle. You know, any bird of prey, when it really flaps those wings, you know, kaboom. It was just really nice. So these are some other examples other than the fact that I want this to be a good luck elephant, which means that its trunk has to be up. Elephant has been cut out of the background, so there's the elephant and there's the background. And for Puppet Warp, I just need to make sure that that layer is selected. I'm going to go to Puppet Warp, and if I drag anything without first tacking it down, it's going to take everything with it. And very quickly, as you're playing with Puppet Warp, you're going to see where you can tack, what it's going to stretch and what it's not going to stretch. So I want the elephant's legs to stay in place. But I don't mind if the neck comes up, because if I'm going to bring this trunk up, right, I need that neck to go with it. You'll see what's going to stretch and what's not. So I'm going to just go ahead and tack the trunk and then go back over that tack. It changes the icon. I'm going to lift the elephant's head. Right? Yeah, pretty cool. And the fact that Photoshop now has video, you can edit video now in Photoshop. So I could keyframe, which is what I did for a quick video that I did. I keyframed the trunk coming up, and so then I blurred it. So in the movie, the trunk's down and then it comes up the top. Very simple to do. You do not have to be a professional movie maker to do that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and accept that, and I've got my trunk. Now, what's wrong with the tip of the trunk? Right, and the reason it looks like that is because why? Right, it was down in the grass. So now you have those content aware tools and content aware move, that healing brush, where we can take the color from the underside of the trunk, place it here, and then we can take the color from the top and place it here, and no one will know the difference. All right, we still have a few more minutes. Let me go over a couple more. That's not very exciting. Oh yeah, okay. If anyone was at my Muse demo, I keep hearing if anybody was at my Muse demo, you know that when you're putting a website together, you are going to need some assets. You're going to need some photos, some icons, things like that. And often people put these things together in a Photoshop file to just get an idea of what they want that web page to be like. And before, what we used to have to do is cut these out or copy and paste them into separate files after we put them together, or slice it. And we now have the ability to use this tool called the generator, and it does so much work in the background. It's absolutely amazing. I was shocked when I first started using this tool. Now my icons are on separate layers, but I would still have to pull those out. I'd have to turn them into either a JPEG, into a PNG, into a GIF, whatever I felt I needed. And now I can do that by just renaming the layer. And before I do this, I want to go back out real quickly because I probably didn't remove that folder. So I just want everyone to know that this is not with mirrors and things like that, right? What's the term for that? Yes, thank you, smoke and mirrors. So all I have in here is the PSD layout, and then I have a couple of files. So I'm going to go back to this one, and I'm going to look at these icons. Just let me change a couple of these. I'm going to make this one a PNG. I can see what I'm typing here. And I'm going to make this one JPEG. So I'm just adding that file format's extension to these. And I'm going to do one more. And of course, all these icons, I would probably want the same format. I wouldn't be making one a JPEG, one a PNG, but just so you guys can see this working, I'm going to do that. I'm going to make one a TIFF and one a, and then I want this image here of outdoor hiking. This is this really pretty one here with all the greenery. I'm I'm going to make that a JPEG. In this naming, I can also specify what the compression is going to be. So I can specify whether it's going to be 10 or 8, or whether it's going to compress it a lot to be a smaller file size or compress it less to be a larger file size. But with just those few changes, I'm going to go to the File menu and select Generate, Image Assets. Go back to my Finder in the exact same location, and I have a new folder called Darby University Layout Assets. So it's taken the name of the file and just added assets, double click, and all of those have been generated. Now, what's really cool is if you go online and just look up generator, you're going to see that there's all kinds of little things you can do to get alternatives. So for example, I can go back here to my icons. Let me go back up to the top. And I can say, I'm not sure whether these icons are going to look better as a JPEG or as a PNG. So I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to say notes .png. I may be designing a website that I want Retina display to get a really nice, clean image that's sharper. And usually those images have to be twice the size of a standard web image. So for this one, I'm going to also add 200%, and I'm going to make this hiking .jpg. Right, that's done. Let's go back out. Now, I don't have to do that command again. All I have to do is just let it, in fact, I'm surprised at how quickly it can come up with this stuff. Just within a few seconds, I go back out to my folder, and I've got now outdoor hiking JPEG, but look at this one at the top, 374K rather than 151. Now I do want to emphasize that the best of all possible situations is that you start with a photo that has as many pixels as you can get. So always take any image that you think might end up on a website or in a print as high a resolution as your phone can do. Even if it means you get less pictures on your phone or on your camera, you want it at the highest resolution you can capture it, because then that one photo can be used for print, it can be blown up for a poster, it can be placed on the web, it can be doubled in size for Retina display. It's always easier to go down in pixels than to have Photoshop fill those pixels in for you. In the past, actually the whole life of Photoshop, this is one of the big goals, is that they're constantly trying to increase the number of pixels and make it look good. But we get artifacts, we introduce pixels that are weird colors, but the newest algorithms are doing an amazing job. I'm shocked at how clear these photos can be at twice the size when we didn't start out with those pixels. But again, if you've got a photo that has the pixels, it's much easier to remove pixels than it is to add them. So in this case, I would probably trust it, just because starting in 2014, I feel like we've just got even a better way to increase the number of pixels. But if you have that larger image, that's a great way to go. And then just cut it in half or even less for something that is not going to be on a Retina display. Mm-hmm.
Can you explain how to increase the number of pixels in it?
Yeah, so if I had an image, let's say, let's just use this one, and I do image size. There's lots of different ways I can also save it as it. I want to, let's say, increase this from 72 to 300. And when it resamples, if resample is on, it means that it's either going to throw pixels away or add pixels. So what I have to do quite often is someone gives me a 20 megabyte image, and then I know I only need 300 pixels per inch, or I only need 72 or 92 pixels per inch. And instead what I do is I bring that size down, and if you use automatic, it's going to use one of these enlargements. Automatically, it's going to look at that photo and do it. But you may want to spend just a few minutes. There's several movies in lynda.com that go through each of these so that you can override it if you want to for a specific use for increasing. But by doing this, I'm going to, more than triple, right, the number of, at least between double and triple the number of pixels when you click OK. So also make a copy. Keep your originals, make a copy, and then do that one. I was saying in the previous version, this is why people who do a lot of photography have several terabyte drives sitting around. Have scratch disks that you can put this on, because you don't want to mess up your, not mess up, but change your original image, because you never know, 2 years down the road you're going to want to go back to that original image. Any other questions?